Hey guys, what's up? It's Grim, and the purpose of today's video is to give you an overview of the Outlaw Rogue in patch 8.3 in both Raids and Mythic Plus. I'll be going over everything from talents to gearing choices, but I'm going to try to keep it brief and in bite-sized chunks. To serve this purpose, I'll leave timestamps in the description to various sections of this guide. I'll also have more in-depth videos on my channel if you want to have a look through those. And if you have any other questions, make sure to leave them in the comments and I'll try to answer those as soon as possible. Without further ado, let's get straight into the first section. Let's start us off with having a look at the talent setup for the Outlaw Rogue. And the one that's on your screen right now is the one that works for pretty much everything. On a pure single target fight, you can swap out Dancing Steel in the last row for Blade Rush, but other than that, this is a basic setup that works in almost every situation. Secondly, let's talk about Azerite traits for the Outlaw Rogue. And unless a fight is pure single target, you want to have at least one Keep Your Wits About You trait, because this is super strong in AoE. Now, because not many fights are pure single target these days, a lot of rogues run one of these traits full time. You can fill up the rest of your traits with a combination of Ace Up Your Sleeve and Deadshot traits, and also sprinkle in 1 or 2 Brigand's Blitz if you can. If you have Hasted Corruptions, Brigand's Blitz gains even more value. Now, on the inner ring, you are looking for Unstable Flames, and secondly for Overwhelming Power. Next, let's have a look at the essences that you want to be using. For single target, you're going to be looking for either Condensed Life Force or Breath of the Dying as major essences, with Vision of Perfection as a decent backup. For AoE, the two main essences are considered Essence of the Focusing Iris or Blood of the Enemy. Another backup here again is Vision of Perfection, and if you know how to make use of the Death Reset mechanic in Breath of the Dying, this is another extremely potent essence on AoE. The minor essences that you want to use in any sort of situation are, in order of importance, the Memory of Lucid Dreams essence, Breath of the Dying, Vision of Perfection, and alternatively you can go Conflict and Strife or Purification Protocol on AoE fights. For corruptions, you're going to want to be looking for the Lash of the Void corruption, which only drops from Ra-Den in the Ny'alotha raid in the form of fist weapons. You want to fill out the rest of your corruption budget with a combination of the Severe corruption, which increases your critical strike rating, and the Strike Through corruption, which increases your critical strike damage. Try to balance these two, favoring slightly towards the Strike Through corruption. For stats on your gear, you want to be looking for critical strike rating and versatility. As for consumables, you want to be using an agility flask, the agility rune, and crit food if you want, or versatility food if you want to be a bit more defensive. Our go-to potion is the potion of Unbridled Fury, and on 4 or more targets you can use the potion of Empowered Proximity. The Outlaw rotation is based around using builders to gain combo points and then spending those on finishers from a priority list. Your main builders are going to be Sinister Strike and Pistol Shot, though most of the time this will be Sinister Strike. Sinister Strike also has a chance of proccing the Opportunity buff, which empowers your Pistol Shot, in which case you want to use that as your builder. Opportunity also gives your Pistol Shot 2 combo points instead of 1, so keep that in mind and make sure you don't overcap. You always want to use your finishers at max combo points. However, if you have rolled the Broadsides buff, or as I just said, the Opportunity buff, it is okay to finish at 1 lower than max. The only exception to this is if you are playing 2 or more Ace Up Your Sleeves traits and you're using the Between the Eyes finisher, you always want to make sure you finish at max combo points even if you overcap. The finisher priority list starts off with using the Roll the Bones ability if you haven't got any of its buffs active at the moment. Secondly, you want to make sure that if you are in an AoE situation or any situation with multiple targets, you have Blade Flurry up. Although this is not technically a finisher, it is important to have this up before you start dealing damage. Next, you want to make sure you use your Between the Eyes on cooldown regardless of which buff you have rolled with Roll the Bones. Next, you want to make sure that you use Roll the Bones to fish for good buffs, and I'll get to which buffs are good in just a minute. And finally, you want to make sure you dispatch if you meet all of the above conditions. So which Roll the Bones buffs are the ones you want to be looking out for? Now this splits itself between being over 40-ish% and below it. When you are below this, you want to be looking out for Ruthless Precision, any 2 buff or any 5 buff when you are on single target. And if you are playing AoE, you want to be looking out for Ruthless Precision, Ground Melee or Broadsides, or any 2 buff or any 5 buff. Keep in mind though that the Skull and Crossbones buff counts as having 0 buffs because it gets overwritten by Keep Your Wits About You, the Azerite trait. Once you start getting over 40% crit, Ruthless Precision starts to fall off, and if you're on single target you are instead now looking for broadsides, any 2 buff or any 5 buff. If you find yourself in an AoE situation, you are looking for broadsides, true bearing, grand melee, any 2 buff or any 5 buff, and the same skull and crossbones rule still applies. Next, let's talk about the kind of gear you want to be looking out for. As I've already said, critical strike and versatility are both important stats, so try to have as much of this on your gear as possible. When it comes to weapons, however, the weapon itself is usually more important than the stats on it. One very important weapon to have, I've already mentioned, is from Raden in the Nyalotha raid and has the Lash of the Void corruption on it. If you find yourself in AoE situations often, then Diver's Folly from the Eternal Palace is still an incredibly strong weapon. If you find yourself in single target a lot of the time, then the Bile-stained Krog Tusks from the Underrot dungeon are incredibly strong. When it comes to trinkets, there is a variety of good options. From dungeons, for example, there is the Deadeye Spyglass you want to be looking out for, which drops from Siege of Borealis, and also the Tiny Electromental in a jar that drops from the Temple of Sephthalis is very strong. From raids, you can be on the lookout for the Ashvane's Razor Claw from the Eternal Palace, even though it is last tier. In the Nyalotha raid, there is the Torment in a jar that is incredibly strong for AoE situations, and you often see people run the Vita charged Titan Shard from Raden. Even though this is not very good for Outlaw specifically, it is a big buff to your group's damage. Lastly, let's talk about the utility that an Outlaw Rogue can bring to a group. We have very strong defensives in the form of Feint, Cheat Death and Cloak of Shadows. We also bring a Shroud of Concealment, which can be super useful especially in Mythic Plus to facilitate all kinds of skips. We also bring the Outlaw exclusive Gouge, which is an incapacitate on a fairly short cooldown and doesn't share diminishing returns with loads of stuns. And speaking of stuns, Between the Eyes applies a 6-second stun when used at max combo points, which interacts great with the Prey on the Weak talent. On top of that, we also bring the Cheap Shot ability, which is a short stun that can be used from stealth, but does apply the full duration of this Prey on the Weak talent as well. And last but not least, we of course also bring Tricks of the Trade, an incredibly useful tool that we can use to misdirect threat to the tank. And with that, you are now up to date with the Outlaw Rogue in patch 8.3. As I said before, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, hit subscribe if you enjoy my content, and come find me on my stream twitch.tv/crimwow. Thank you guys for watching, I'll see you in the next video.